Dudley gave an odd, shuddering gasp, as though he had been doused in icy water. Something had happened to the night. The star-strewn indigo sky was suddenly pitch black and lightless. The stars, the moon, the misty street lamps at either end of the alley had vanished. The distant rumble of cars and the whisper of trees had gone. The balmy evening was suddenly piercingly, bitingly cold. They were surrounded by total, impenetrable, silent darkness, as though some giant hand had dropped a thick, icy mantle over the entire alleyway, blinding them. For a split second Harry thought he had done magic without meaning to, despite the fact that he'd been resisting as hard as he could. Then his reason caught up with his senses. He didn't have the power to turn off the stars. He turned his head this way and that, trying to see something, but the darkness pressed on his eyes like a weightless veil. Dudley's terrified voice broke in Harry's ear. What are you doing? Street, stop it. I'm not doing anything. Shut up and don't move. I can't see. I've gone blind. I said shut up. Harry stood stock still, turning his sightless eyes left and right. The cold was so intense he was shivering all over. Goosebumps had erupted up his arms and the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. He opened his eyes to their fullest extent, staring blankly round. Unseeing. It was impossible. They couldn't be here. Not in Little Winging. He strained his ears. He would hear them. I'll tell Dad. Dudley whimpered. Where are you? What are you do? Will you shut up? Harry hissed. I'm trying to listen, but he fell silent. He had heard just the thing he had been dreading. There was something in the alleyway apart from themselves. Something that was drawing long, hoarse, rattling breaths. Harry felt a horrible jolt of dread as he stood trembling in the freezing air. See, cut it out. Stop doing it. I'll hit you. I swear I will. Dudley, shudawam. A fist made contact with the side of Harry's head, lifting him off his feet. Small white lights popped in front of his eyes. For the second time in an hour Harry felt as though his head had been cleaved in two. Next moment, he had landed hard on the ground and his wand had flown out of his hand. You moron. Dudley, Harry yelled, his eyes watering with pain as he scrambled to his hands and knees, feeling around frantically in the blackness. He heard Dudley blundering away, hitting the alley fence, stumbling. Dudley, come back. You're running right at. There was a horrible squealing yell and Dudley's footsteps stopped. At the same moment, Harry felt a creeping chill behind him that could mean only one thing. There was more than one. Dudley, keep your mouth shut. Whatever you do, keep your mouth shut. Wand, Harry muttered frantically, his hands flying over the ground like spiders. Where's the wand? Come on, Lumos, he said the spell automatically, desperate for light to help him in his search. And to his disbelieving relief, light flared inches from his right hand. The wand tip had ignited. Harry snatched it up, scrambled to his feet and turned around. His stomach turned over. A towering, hooded figure was gliding smoothly towards him, hovering over the ground, no feet or face visible beneath its robes, sucking on the night as it came, stumbling backwards. Harry raised his wand, expecto patronum. A silvery wisp of vapor shot from the tip of the wand and the Dementor slowed, but the spell hadn't worked properly. Tripping over his own feet, Harry retreated further as the Dementor bore down upon him, panic fogging his brain. Concentrate. A pair of gray, slimy, scabbed hands slid from inside the Dementor's robes, reaching for him. A rushing noise filled Harry's ears, expecto patronum. His voice sounded dim and distant. Another wisp of silver smoke, feebler than the last, drifted from the wand. He couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't work the spell. There was laughter inside his own head, shrill, high-pitched laughter. He could smell the Dementor's putrid, death-cold breath filling his own lungs, drowning him. Think, something happy, but there was no happiness in him. The Dementor's icy fingers were closing on his throat. The high-pitched laughter was growing louder and louder, and a voice spoke inside his head. Bow to death, Harry. It might even be painless. I would not know. I have never died. He was never going to see Ron and Hermione again. And their faces burst clearly into his mind as he fought for breath, expecto patronum. An enormous silver stag erupted from the tip of Harry's wand. Its antlers caught the Dementor, in the place where the heart should have been. It was thrown backwards, weightless as darkness, and as the stag charged, the Dementor swooped away, bat-like and defeated. "This way!" Harry shouted at the stag. Wheeling round, he sprinted down the alleyway, holding the lit wand aloft. Dudley, Dudley. He had run barely a dozen steps when he reached them. Dudley was curled up on the ground, his arms clamped over his face. A second Dementor was crouching low over him, gripping his wrists in its slimy hands, pressing them slowly, almost lovingly apart, lowering its hooded head towards Dudley's face as though about to kiss him. "Get it!" Harry bellowed, and with a rushing, roaring sound, the silver stag he had conjured came galloping past him. The Dementor's eyeless face was barely an inch from Dudley's when the silver antlers caught it. The thing was thrown up into the air and, like its fellow, it soared away and was absorbed into the darkness. The stag cantered to the end of the alleyway and dissolved into silver mist. Moon, stars and street lamps burst back into life. A warm breeze swept the alleyway. Trees rustled in neighboring gardens and the mundane rumble of cars in Magnolia Crescent filled the air again. Harry stood quite still, all his senses vibrating, taking in the abrupt return to normal. After a moment, he became aware that his t-shirt was sticking to him. He was drenched in sweat. He could not believe what had just happened. Dementors here, in Little Winging. Dudley lay curled up on the ground, whimpering and shaking. Harry bent down to see whether he was in a fit state to stand up, but then he heard loud, running footsteps behind him. Instinctively raising his wand again, he span on his heel to face the newcomer.